Right then, good evening everybody. Thank you very much for joining in this evening's IRD, in which we are going to be making some of these little guys, a little turn and carve pumpkin. The timber I'm going to be using tonight is going to be lime because it's a nice, easy wood to carve. So I actually hand carve these, as opposed to using micromotors and burrs and things like that. But I'm also going to run through that and different ones that I've found that work compared to ones that don't. Lime's quite a pain, is this timber to work with, so we will go through those bits and pieces. These little guys are a lot of fun to make. I've been making these for a lot of years, and I've made them out of lots and lots of different timbers. So as I say, I'm going to be using lime or linden this evening. This one is a little guy that we made from oak. It was rock hard, so I wouldn't recommend using this timber, although it does look very cute. And I'm pretty sure that this guy might have been finished with some glow-in-the-dark Hampshire sheen embellishing wax, possibly. I think that's why he's made from oak, but that was many, many moons ago, and you can't get that stuff anymore, so yeah. But I think that is why I made him from oak. The others I have made from lime. So we've got various sizes. This is the biggest. I have done some slightly bigger. Let me get a measurement for you on him. So he is just over 4 inches in diameter. And these guys are great. You can put either a little tea light in there so you can light them up, or you can put candy and sweets in there, things like that. I have a lady who has been buying them for the past few years over in the US, and they fill them with candy. Down to this little guy. This one is only a couple of inches in diameter. Again, you can just about fit a tea light in. I think the smallest one that I've done was about 1.5 inches. It was absolutely minuscule. And it was a little bit of a pain because of that. And I mean, these guys have all got little faces, but you don't have to go with the faces. You can just make something like this one. So this one is just a rough textured. This is tool finished, is this particular one, and I have to say I do like that. This was a bit of lime that had all sorts of knots and things going on there, so I just left it and I tool finished it, and I really love this one. So we will crack on and make a start. I'm not quite sure how long it will take. I have got a couple of pieces that have been part made over here. So these ones I made earlier on. They haven't been hollowed particularly well. I've just done a little quick face and started the carving process so that we can move on to that. So as I say, these are part finished. But I've done something with these I don't normally do, and I will talk about that. I don't quite know why I've done it. But anyway, yeah, I'll talk about that as we go along. So I'm going to use slightly smaller timber for the demo this evening. I'm going to use 3.5 inch square and 4.5 inches long. So it is lime. I've just put an X on each side to mark the centres. And the reason I'm just going with the smaller piece is just because, just to save time. The bigger it is, the longer it takes to do all the carving, etc. So we'll just try and save a little bit of time there, because the carving side of things can be quite time consuming. So as always, I will be putting my respirator on in a minute. And it will, even with the new mics, it does affect the sound a little bit. There's not a lot I can do about that, I'm afraid. But this particular wood I am really sensitive to. It is so dusty when you turn it. I really don't like it. And it's quite a fluffy wood, so you've got to have very sharp tools when you're working with lime. But yeah, it's fantastic for carving. So it's one of those trade-offs that you've got to live with, really. Right, so I'm just getting that set up, and then I will put the respirator on and make sure that we are happy with the sound. So we're working from a spindle blank. So whenever you're making a box, spindle blanks are much easier to work with. So the grain is running straight through the spindle of the lathe. So I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge to rough this out to begin with. We want decent speed with it being lime, otherwise it doesn't cut particularly well. So just back and forth with the roughing gouge. And I do want to keep as much width to this as possible, really. So we're going to rotate the tool, and I'm just going to cut backwards as a finishing cut. And by rotating the tool over so that the flute is more at, it's about, not quite the 10 o'clock position, not quite the 9 o'clock position, sort of in between the two. It puts the cutting area at quite a sheer angle. So it gives you a very nice finish off the tool. I just want to get those out actually, but we've got quite a gap, so I'll move that in. There we go. Yeah, that's fine. So I need to put a couple of tenons on here, so we're going to go with a beading parting tool, tenon on each end, one for the lid and one for the base. So I'm going to cut handle nice and low, I'm going to push upwards and inwards at the same time. Same on the other side. Yeah. And then we can put this into the chuck, and we can part off the lid section whichever way around we want it to be. Now there's nothing problematic. This is actually English lime, and English lime, it does tend to have quite a bit of discoloration running through it. This is a perfect example. So we've got a little bit of green running through, which is not uncommon for the English stuff. If you want really, really clean lime, Italian lime is really quite creamy, and it's got a very even grain. So when I was doing my carving apprenticeship, Italian lime is what we used to use if there were any particular jobs that had come in. Not that I did that many commercial things, but it was always Italian lime was preferred because it is that little bit cleaner. Now, I actually prefer the English lime for this project because you've got those little bits of lines running through, and so pumpkins always have lots of little bits of colour running through them, so it kind of works in this instance. So I actually prefer the English lime. Now I did use some lime over in the US in St. Paul, and that was really clean stuff as well. So I'm not quite sure. In fact, let's bring that up while we part that off. I'm not quite sure what kind of which species it was exactly, but it was really nice stuff. Okay, so when you are parting the lid off, I tend to use stem centers or centers with retractable points so that they don't particularly damage the piece of wood. And lime does damage quite easily, so even though these are retractable, you'll see that the centers have made quite a mark in the end. But having said that, we can still utilize the chucking point, so we can turn that back into the overall shape of the piece. The one at the base, not so much. You're going to struggle with that. But you need to bear in mind the design that you're going to have for your little pumpkin box. Which one shall I grab? Okay. So this one was one of the first ones I actually ever made, and the one thing I really like the shape of the lid, and I like the stem at the top. If we can get that on, there we go. The only downside to it is it's not very practical for actually trying to pick this up. Now the lid is loose fitting, and you really do need it loose fitting if you're going to be putting stuff inside it potentially. But even so, there's not a lot of purchase that you can get on there. It's got a tiny little bit, not quite an undercut, but it could do with one. So this was the first one that I'd done. The lid section itself is quite thin, so we don't need a large amount of timber put aside for the lid. I then started doing this kind of lid, so I tried to keep it looking like a stem or a stalk. Sorry, that's the one I should have picked up. And you can see that it's a little bit taller, and we've got more of a cove going on here so that you can actually hold that in order to remove the lid. You can actually do a separate lid if you wanted, so you could put do a walnut lid or something like that in a contrasting wood, and I might do that this evening because I haven't really done something like that before, and it's something that I've wanted to try just to give it some natural contrast. So I think that we might do that in this instance. But what I'm trying to say is, if you look at the actual wood required with these two pieces, you need a little bit more if you're going to do a taller stem, which makes perfect sense. So it depends what design you are going for. I've never had a problem lifting that lid off, but if somebody's not particularly dexterous, then that is quite difficult to lift off potentially. So if we bear that in mind, we probably need about a third of the piece of wood put aside for the lid. But like I say, I think I might try putting a contrasting wood as the stem this evening. So it just means I've got a little bit more room for the box. So I'm going to take about an inch for the lid section. Parting tool, straight edge parting tool, we're just going to go straight up. Come down, take half a tool width cut to the side. And just walk that back and forth between the two, and we should get the lid parted off pretty quickly. Now, because we've got a centre up, I don't want to part that all the way through because I don't want to not be able to grab it. So I'm going to stop the lathe, move the tailstock out of the way, and break the lid away. So just pushing it so that it snaps the fibres instead of twisting it. If you twist it, it can pluck out that whole area and cause you some damage inside. It's not that much of a problem if it does, to be fair, but I'd rather not. Okay, so now you've got to decide which way round you want the lid and the base to be, as in which side you want the tenon and the recess. Nearly all the boxes that I do, I always put the tenon on the lid for this particular box. I don't know why, it's just a habit that you get into, but that is what I prefer to do. So I am going to put the tenon onto the lid, and I suppose it just means that your recess is nice and open, and you've not got anything in just sort of spoiling the view of it, really, because they are quite nice things when you open them as well. So that's the plan. So we do need to start thinking about shape and form with this quite quickly, and as such, you might want to consider putting the lid and the base together again, as in we might want to cut our tenon and recess and then shape the piece. We've got tenon on each end, so there's no problem with that, but it just means that we can start to get a feel for the overall shape. So I'm going to start to put the recess in here, In fact, I'm not. I'm going to start with the lid. This is just because my preference is to fit a jam chuck onto of a tenon into a recess. So I prefer to be cutting the recess to fit them together. I'm not as big a fan of doing it the other way around. So we're going to cut our tenon. So the consideration that we have to make with this, I'm sorry I keep going backwards and forwards to pick these bits and pieces up to show you. You need to be aware of the size of jaws that you are working with, because it's not so much for the tenon, because the tenon's going to be jam chucked for finishing this off, but the recess, you need to be able to hold it on expansion. Can we go onto your camera? So whatever you do, make sure that you don't cut your tenon too large so that your recess ends up large to accommodate it if you don't have the jaws to fit. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So you're kind of working a few steps ahead with it. So these are relatively small jaws. These are the Axminster E jaws. So they aren't particularly big, but they've still got a pretty decent capacity. So the other thing is, you don't want your tenon to be too close to the outside edge, because we still need to shape this. And if I cut the tenon there with just a tiny little 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch or so, just letting it in that much, it's not going to work. We're going to shape it and we're going to cut through it into the tenon. So we need to go further in for the tenon. But it's quite a balance. So earlier on, when I've turned these other pieces, and because they were on larger pieces of lime, I've left the recess quite small really for the size. So it's meant that I've got quite an undercut, and actually I'm not keen on how that looks. So I've cut the undercut and I've hollowed it out, etc. But there's no need for that large undercut to be there. So it's, as I say, it's a balance between the chuck that you've got. You could always turn another jam chuck to sort it out, but yeah, it's a happy balance between working with the jaws that you've got, so that you're not making too wide a recess, and also not cutting this too close to the edge. Okay, so we've cut our tenon. Now I'm just going to clean this up a little bit, and I'm going to just recess it a tiny bit, give it a little bit of shape in there. The reason I bother to do that is because it takes a bit of weight out of the lid, and it shows that you've made the effort to turn it. So I'm just going to clean this up. And we're just going to hollow this out just a bit. This is something else that you need to be careful with. If you hollow this lid out considerably, you can end up turning into it, because the exterior at the moment is an unknown shape and size. So just be very careful with that. A little bit more. Now this underside, you are not going to get any other opportunity to sand it up, so give this a clean up at this stage now. Just give that a quick tidy. And I don't want that to be too sharp on the edge, so I'm just going to round that over. If you want to put some decoration on the inside, then put some decoration on the inside. Just for time, I'm not going to do that. And to be honest, it doesn't really need it. You can always use that canvas area there to sign your piece of work, for example, because with the whole of this box being decorated externally, it's very difficult to know where you can put a signature. So that is probably where I would choose to put it. So it doesn't... Lime's a funny one. For hand sanding, it's great. For mechanical sanding, it's a bit of a pain because it scores quite easily. 240. So you can end up going through your abrasives and still having some scratch marks on there. But anyway, so now we've got our tenon. I am just going to make it a tiny bit longer. Actually, it's only about 1/8 of an inch long, so I am going to make it a little bit longer than that. 1/8 of an inch is fine. It's more for the jam chuck. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is make sure that your actual tenon or spigot or whatever you want to call it is parallel, because whenever you are using something as with a jam chuck, it's always slightly better if you can make it parallel, because then 100% of that surface is in contact with the recess and it will work very nicely. Right. There we go. So we can take this off for now. That is the underneath of our lid done. And we can prop the base in. Now what I like about this project is that you can turn nearly all of the outside shape, because the bottom of a pumpkin is fairly flat. So we can give ourselves a really good exterior shape to this, and then we can hollow it. So we've got a really we've got a good shape to follow. So we'll clean up this face. If you want it to be totally safe, make sure that that ridge there at the side of the underneath of the lid, this lip here, you want that to be perfectly flat, and you want this face to be perfectly flat, and then they will butt up perfect. Now we can start to fit the lid as a jam chuck fit. So I'm going to need a couple of tools. I'm going to need my parting tool and my spindle gouge. So I'm going to make an initial hole and just widen it, and then we'll fit the jam chuck, and then we can shape our piece. So spindle gouge, I'm going to go right in the middle. So the tool is at 45 degrees. I've lifted the tool rest up so that the tool is on center height, and I'm just going to relieve a little bit of the timber there, and then we can start to fit our jam chuck. So I'm just going to go in with a straight edge parting tool so that we get that parallel recess. I always undersize it to begin with. There's all sorts of clever little ways that you can measure this with calipers, and you can get a fit relatively quickly, but I am not particularly good with measuring, so I prefer to trial and error it until it fits, and I find that I get a much better jam chuck in that instance. So all I'm doing, I'm taking a cut, and then I'm just sitting the tenon, so the tenon of the lid, into that recess, closing the two up, and I can see there that I've got about 1/4 of an inch left to take off. So we can't just take 1/4 of an inch off by putting the tool 1/4 of an inch away, because that'll take 1/4 of an inch off both sides, 1/2 an inch. So we just go halve that, take about just less than 1/8 of an inch, in case you cut slightly wonky. And then, yeah, not much left to go. So this particular wood is actually very, very good for jam chucks. So if I ended up with a little scrap of it, like the size of this lid, I would hang on to that, because it's often softer than most other timbers that you use, and it also swells very easily if it's wet. So if you are jam chucking something and you slightly underfit it, if it's slightly loose, you can just put water onto the lime or the basswood and it will swell and it will just help it grip a little bit more. Ideally you want to cut it right, but sometimes it doesn't always happen. The other great thing is, because it is fairly soft wood, any other wood that you are fitting, it's not going to damage that wood when you push them together. So we've got roughly about half of the tenon sat inside there. If I push that on and rotate, we're sat into about here, and the same again there. So about 50-50. That is very close now to becoming a jam chuck. We only need an extra quarter of that circle to fit, and we're away. So this is where we want to just be scraping. We don't want to be cutting, because it will go from being too tight a fit that it doesn't fit to being loose in seconds. So now we're about 2/3 in and 1/3 out. Couple more scrapes and we should be in there. But like I say, everybody's got their own little methods for fitting jam chucks. I just prefer this. So that will not quite tap in, not quite. It'll damage one surface or the other. That will tap in now. It's up to you whether you line your grain up at this point. I don't know why I have a habit of doing it. I suppose it's just in case it does warp slightly, then it's going to warp at the same rate. But we're just going to tap that in. Now we can start to shape our box. So I'm not too bothered about the stalk, because we're going to fit that separately, which I think will look pretty good. But we do want to shape the box. In fact, I could have taken a little bit more for the lid, because that is a bit tall for our pumpkin. So what have we got to be careful of? Well, the lid is held on via a jam chuck. So if we are turning towards the tailstock, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on here, because it can pull that out. It's with that level of jam chuck fit that we've had to tap it together, then we should technically be okay. But you can never be 100% sure. So if you are in doubt at all, bring up your tailstock for a little bit of extra support, just while we are doing the majority of the shaping. Now, normally that tailstock gets in the way quite quickly, but in this instance, we can do quite a bit of work, really. We need to be careful that we know how far in we've cut that tenon. So we're in about, not quite ½ inch, about 3/8 of an inch. Oh, touching the chuck with the tool rest, never a good thing. So we don't want to overshape that. We need to think about the placement of the lid, so where you want the join. These guys, these are quite almost on the widest point for this particular box. As I say, these ones I whipped up earlier, but they're not particularly good. So if I can just, yeah, they are on the widest point. I don't particularly like that. I like it set in a little bit, because when you cut the lid from a pumpkin, you want it a little bit further up that curve, if that makes sense. So that's more what we're after. So I think we'll have the widest point, not quite halfway, but a little bit further up than we have with those other two. But this is where you'll start to panic a little bit if you A, don't know where your tenon is, and B, if you've hollowed out the lid extensively, that can also be a little bit of a dodgy situation because you're not quite sure if you could end up parting through into the lid. So I think we will end up losing quite a bit of the bottom of this. It is quite tall actually, especially with us not putting the stalk on. If we were putting the stalk on, I would probably have, well, I would definitely have parted much more off for the lid area. And it's completely up to you what your proportions will look like for your pumpkin box. So I'm just using the 1/4 inch bow gouge to get the majority of the shaping done. And I think I don't really want it much longer than this area here, so that is going to go. That is going to go. But what I end up doing with these is actually undercutting underneath again, slightly, right towards the end. And I kind of like there to be a slight square angle on the base, just to make it look that little bit more pumpkin-like, because at the moment it's a bit spherical, which I'm not massively keen on. So I kind of want a wide area down here, a wide shoulder. Now, the external of the base we can finish off, but we want all this area so that we're happy with it. Now, I have overcut, if you can see here on the top camera, we've got a gap opening up, and that's not because the jam chock is incorrect, it's just I have basically I over rounded that front face, so I'm just going to flatten it off again when we get in there, and it's also bottomed out on the base section. So I'm going to move the tailstock out of the way because it is in the way now. And if I was going to be, I will turn this section as if this was going to be the stem, the stalk, just to show you how I normally go about it. If you're keeping it as one piece, it is a bit easier to do it if it is one piece. So basically, I'm just going to cut a cove on there, and if you can just see right where the two areas meet, so the top of the lid and the bottom of the stem or the stalk, I go in there with a parting tool and I just make that a nice clean join, and that is then ready for putting some texture on there. If you want to, you could just leave it plain if you wanted to. And then the area that's always a slight problem is the top, where we've got the marks from the tailstock. So those, you just want to get rid of them. You can go concave, convex, whatever you want. So when it comes to sanding, I don't actually bother, because we're going to be carving all this area away, all of it. Every single part of the surface of this is going to be carved. The only exception is the inside of the lid and the inside of the base. So as such, I don't particularly bother doing it. It's just a waste of abrasives. I've got a little bit of a tool mark on here. I deliberately left it because it really doesn't matter. It's going to be carved away if we were going to leave that stalk on there. So I am going to continue to turn this through, and then we'll put a little hole in there so that we can make a stalk out of a little bit of walnut or some brown oak. I'll see what I have. Just for a bit of a contrast. Just move that in, quickly removing wood. So you've got a couple of choices in this instance. You can, I'm going to go slightly concave just at the top. Just come back in on myself a little bit. So again, if you've over hollowed your lid, you're not going to know what leeway you have at this point, but we've only just hollowed it a tiny amount, so I know that this is pretty solid. So I'm just coming back in on myself here, and your options at this stage are you can leave a little peg for locating it out of the wood here, so that means drilling a hole in the walnut, or the opposite, you can put a locating tenon onto the walnut, whichever works best. I am probably just going to use this as a little peg, actually. It seems daft not to, and it saves having to drill a hole. So I am a fan of 4mm roughly. It's going to be slightly tapered because I haven't got fingernail grinds. See if I can make that a little bit straighter with the spindle gouge. Yeah, that's better. So that just gives me something to locate it with. I've gone in a little bit here. I'm going to come back out actually and go in earlier. And then straighten off for putting our external, don't need all that length, our external stalk. Yeah, that's alright. So getting the lid off can be a problem, especially if in this instance we've not got a lot of anything that we can purchase with. So I have in my tool bag a knife with quite a thick blade. It's very good for just popping lids off in this instance. Now we've got a nice open area here, so I can just go in and just very, very carefully just go around and loosen it a little bit. If you've got quite a depth to go into, you can just tap the knife in and that will probably force it open quite a bit, but just be careful with this because we don't want to damage the edge like I've just done there. So let me just turn that round and push that upside down so that now it's using the width of the blade to just pare that away. So now we can start to hollow our base section, but this is too tight a fit. That's an impossible fit to be working with, so we need to just widen that a little bit. So I'm going to go in and scrape that again. If you want a really nice fit, a really perfect fit, you need to hollow the box potentially and just leave it to settle. Most of the time we don't tend to bother doing things like that. As wood turners, we like to just get on with it. So let's just see if that's any better. I don't want it really loose, rattling around all over the place. Yeah, still too much of a push is that. We want it to be more of a drop fit lid. Just a few scrapes. So that's a much better fit. Yeah, that's better. Now, because we've turned this, and because I had that little bit of a gap, you might be able to see that it's not married up particularly well with the lid and the base anymore. But again, I haven't really got a problem with that, because you can see that little gap there. I haven't got a problem with that because we're not going to be carving at this stage. We're not going to be doing any decoration at this stage, not just yet. I like to get this hollowed a little bit more first. If you wanted to, whilst the jam chucked together, you could certainly start using some of your tools, and you could start to cut that away. I don't know why, I just like to hollow it. No, I do know why. I like to hollow it at this stage whilst the sides are still solid, because if you start to carve in and you start to carve the channels to make the kind of segments of the skin around the pumpkin, if you carve it quite deep and then you start hollowing it and you don't realise, you can blow it apart. So whilst it's still solid on the outside, that is when we want to be hollowing it, so that we know exactly what we're getting. So I'm happy with that fit. I can just put some kitchen roll or something around this to push them together whilst I'm carving the whole thing, if that makes sense, because we will carve it whilst it is on the lathe. I will go through the carving just because it's easy to hold. I do have a little vise that I've grabbed so that I can show you that works well as either, but you want to be carving both pieces together so that the segments actually match up. Okay, so on to hollowing. Let's get on with the hollowing. So beginning with the spindle gouge, we're just going to go in there with the tool at 45 degrees and just really start removing the material. And we can remove quite a lot with the spindle gouge before we actually start maxing this out. So as soon as we start hearing that screeching, we're going to have to look at a slightly different tool. So there's lots of them available. I use a small 8mm cutter quite regularly, but I have got a couple of other options this evening. So these are some of the options. So this one is an 8mm carbide. It's on a square bar. You might have seen me use this if you were at the IRD for the little hollow form. And it's often my go-to because you don't actually need to handle it. It comes with a little handle over the top of it, a little neoprene sleeve. And it's a really easy tool to use. It's on a square bar, so the cutter is set at 45 degrees, which is that kind of magic sweet spot. So you just put it flat onto the bar with the tool, with the cutter at 45, and you can just hollow away. And you can undercut this quite easily. If you've got a nice wide opening, dead easy to do. You just push it further out and you can make all those cuts in there. And yeah, it's very, very easy to use. The other alternatives we've got, I've been using 6mm cutters recently, and the reason I've been using the 6mm are they are very efficient at removing timber, and you can go that little bit faster. You can turn the speed up that little bit more. So this is a tiny little 6mm cutter on a bar, but you've got to handle it. It doesn't come handled. So you just put it into one of the gold handles from Hope Wood Turning. This, I think the bar is 10mm. Let me measure it and I'll tell you. So it'll fit in any kind of collet system. It is, yeah, 10mm. So it will fit in any collet system at all, and it's a brilliant tool. But yeah, you can turn that a little bit faster. The 6mm are incredibly efficient. So I'm going to have a go with this evening instead of the 8mm, because although the 8mm is brilliant, when you're only turning sort of something very, very small, I like to get the speed up so I get a better cut, as opposed to keeping the speed a lot lower. So we'll pop this in there. We've still got, it's still in a small handle, so it's got really good manoeuvrability. But for me, what I also like is it's a lot heavier than the 8mm because it's got the handle on there. The 8mm cutter, Anthony, they are Hope wood turning tools. I'll show you the logo. So this is they're by Simon Hope, who's a wood turner in the UK. He's been a wood turner for a really long time, and he's a tool maker, and his tools are superb. But yeah, the main difference that we've got going on here, and this is why I wanted to try this out, is this is a fantastic tool, but it's very light, and I struggle with vibration when I'm over the tool rest at all. Even sort of 2 inch over the tool rest, I can start getting vibration because I haven't got the height to keep it down onto the tool rest. And I'm hoping that with this 6mm cutter and combined with having it in a handle, it might just help me overcome that. Like I say, I've also got this one. It came as a set. This one's a hooked tool, so it's a swan neck tool. The cutter is in line with the shank, which means it's nice and stable to use. If it was bent and it was overhanging, it'll flip every time you touch it to the side wall. So that is a good one, but that is very excessive for using something like this. The overhang in this is nothing. It would be useful for these guys, where I've got that really silly undercut. I really aren't sure why I put that onto it. It was just a case of getting it done and not thinking. So that instance, that will fit in there quite nicely, and you can turn and really get a nice undercut, but not really necessary. They are more for turning through smaller holes than a wide opening like this. So that is definitely not needed currently. Let me pop that in my drawer. And that for now. So speed-wise, this needs to be turning pretty quickly. For a 6mm cutter, I could get this up to about 3,000 RPM. And that will give me a very nice clean cut as well, as long as we don't get vibration. And I'm hoping that will allow me to clean this out really nicely. Don't go mad with your hollowing with these boxes, because if you are going to be cutting into those sidewalls and you're going to be creating those segments, it's quite surprising how much you actually have to take off. So this one is an example. If I try and angle it, I'm trying to just get so there on the profile you can see these two sections. I've had to go in quite a bit, and we're still very flat on the top. So actually this needs to drop down a little bit more. I guess that's probably only about 1/8 of an inch, but that's going to increase and it's going to drop in a little bit further. So if you cut this to 1/8 of an inch wall thickness, or just ever so slightly more, you run the risk of cutting through your sides. I've never cut through a side, but I have cut through a base, and that is my next point. So when you're hollowing the base section, because I actually undercut slightly, that one's not a very good example. So I literally meant it when the whole thing is carved. So that is the underneath of our little box. So we've got the little bit that's been cut off at the bottom from the vine. No, it's not. That's not part of the vine. But that little bit there is still present on the bottom of your pumpkins. That is your vine where you've cut it off from. But you often find that they're slightly undercut, slightly dished in at the base. I just like the look of that. You don't have to do it by any means, but that is the shape that I'm going for. So when you hollow this out, don't go crazy and really, really cut it cleanly and, nice and close to the bottom, because if you go back under here, I have nearly cut through. In fact, I have cut through with these little score marks, because again, even though you've turned it and you've undercut slightly, so you've made it slightly concave, you're making it even more concave when you follow your segments round. And I've done it. I've seen daylight through those before, and it's so annoying because that is the very, very last thing that you actually do. Okay, so I'll put my respirator back on and we will continue with the hollowing. So speed needs to be relatively high for this. So because this is on a round bar instead of the square, I am tipping it so that it is at that 45-degree angle. and I'm just going in there, just get a feel for the tool. That cut's really nice, and because it is at a higher speed, because it's a smaller surface area, yeah, that's lovely. We get a very nice finish off there, and it's important to get as good a finish as you can with lime, because to be honest, sanding it, as I've already said, is a bit of a pain. So I'm kind of making the bottom of this flat. I don't want it curved downwards for the reason that I've already explained. I just need to clear out that excess so I can see what's going on and actually feel the wall thickness. So I need to come out a little bit here where we've got this widest point. Yeah. The other thing that you need to bear in mind when you're shaping the inside and you're figuring out your wall thickness is whether or not, and this is going to sound silly, but whether you're putting a face into your pumpkin. Because if you are carving a face, you need it that little bit thinner. Otherwise, you really do make a lot of hard work for yourself. Tell you what, that is taking some wood off quickly. I need to be careful. So you want a little bit of chunk on the base so it will sit flat and it will sit nicely, but you want the wall thickness to be relatively even, because if you are putting a face on there, it's going to be not quite halfway down, but it's not going to be close to the top. So you need good wall thickness down to about here. So yeah, down to about there. So you want the majority of that side wall to be even. Otherwise it just doesn't look so good. So I can go a little bit more into the base. There's plenty there. Don't want it overly heavy. See where we're at. Just got a little bit of a bump just about there. It's fine down the bottom. Yeah, it just needs a little bit of a clean up. So if I am cleaning up, that is now when we've got a mountain in the bottom, so I need to get rid of that. Let me just have a look at this. Yeah, that's it, flush, we're good. So I need to get rid of that pimple in the bottom. And then in order to smooth out any ridges that this tool has caused, because it is 6mm, so it can be not the smoothest of rides when you're hollowing with it. I tend to go up to a larger tool size, as in a larger carbide. So the 8mm might be a good idea in this instance, or even the 10mm. I have got a 10mm, but that feels overkill somehow, so I'm going to try it with the 8. And because it's a wider circle, because the cutter itself is a wider circle, you've got a shallower cutting edge, and that will allow it to just kind of skim over the tops of those little bumps and smooth it all out. It's almost like a scraper, so you could go in with a scraper either. I just prefer these because they cut instead of scraping, and on something like lime, I wouldn't recommend a scraper because it can just fur it all up. So this is the 8mm. Now you can cut on the in cut and the out cut, so you can cut as a draw cut towards you from the inside all the way out, or you can do a push cut. I don't particularly like doing the push cut into end grain for fairly obvious reasons. It can cause a bit of a mess. But I will sometimes do it in an area. If I've got a little bit of a bump and I can feel it, I'll just go back and forth and get rid of that and then do another draw cut. So I think we're not far off. There we go. Now I don't particularly want to spend all night hollowing by any means. I'm just trying to get that as good as I can. I've not done a great job in the base. I will tidy that. Just got a bit of bounce. Nearly there. So something else that is your call, I have kind of left that little lip there, but actually we technically don't need it. Because of the way these lids fit, the stopping point is on the top, so it actually sits flat on there. The tenon doesn't need to sit on the base of that recess. It does give it an additional little bit of support and a little bit more strength, because if you do have a very small area where it overlaps, you can find that can be a little bit fragile. So it's up to you. You can take it off if you want. I do leave it because it does give that little bit of extra support. These can end up in kids' hands for, like I say, putting things in for Halloween. So you make that call as to whether you think it needs that little extra ridge. But for me, there's no harm in doing that. Aesthetically, it might not look quite as good, but it does serve a purpose. Right. But I mean, I've left that nice and discreet. It's only small. It's much bigger on a lot of the others that I've done. So what do we need to do now? We need to give this a sand on the inside because we're not going to get any other opportunity. I might not be able to actually fit my sanding arbor in there because of the size. No, might just get away with it. So we'll just whip over that with some abrasives just so that the inside is finished. And then we will stop for a 10-minute break. And then we can carry on. I feel like I'm being early with this break, but it's just a good point to stop. Because I probably won't carve the whole thing. I will just do a few of the segments just so that you get the gist of it, because it is very repetitive, is the carving side of things, so it can be a bit boring to watch. So this is just a little sanding arbor, and again it's by Hope Wood Turning. This is with the smallest heads that he offers, the 37mm ones. It only just fits. This is about the smallest gap. I've completely forgot to put the dust extraction on then, sorry. Yeah, it does only just fit in there. Where's my little stick gone? So for sanding inside something like that, if you don't want to put your hands in there, and again, it's a bit dodgy if you are putting your hands in because we've got a couple of sharp areas that you could catch yourself. this is my crude sanding stick. It's great. So whenever I'm doing hollow forms that are deep and narrow, I've got a little piece of inch square timber, and then this is a bit of Velcro. This is the loop side, no, it's the hook side of the hook and loop. I've cut a slot into it so that I can slot both ends in there. And then these are the soft pads that Simon Hope sells that I can put on there. And the great thing is you can sort of smush them onto the stick, and you can get in there and you can just sand away, and you're not putting your fingers inside something. This is not too bad, but if I grab one of my little hollow forms that I've been doing, this is the bottom of a hollow form. So these are, my fingers are not long enough to go into the bottom of that hollow form. So that is a perfect example of using that stick, because that gets right down in there into the bottom. And because we've got a squishy pad on there, it'll form around the shape on the inside. And again, I've used the smaller, the 37mm pads. So what's on there? Actually, I'll finish off with that because it's not doing a great job, isn't the sander? It's kind of missing a bit. So I'll put some 240 grit on. And some dust extraction. So we can just go in and just kind of rock it up and around. And just get into all those little nooks and crannies. So very crude, very simple, but also very effective. Okie doke. So at this stage, before we end up turning this guy around, oh, that's good. That's a slightly stiffer fit. So basically we've got a little bit of a build-up of some dust around that recess. Oops. And it's just giving me a slightly tighter fit. Is that risky? Possibly. It'll be fine, I'm sure. I think that'll come off okay. We've got that we can pull it off with pliers if we need to. So it's just given me that bit of extra bite so that it'll hold that in place. I'm making an apple here. It looks more like an apple than a pumpkin. I deliberately went wider at the bottom than on the other one that I showed you because I feel like that one does look like an apple. So anyway. So I'm just going to take this off because the next part of this is the carving side of things. So I'll show you one or two options that we have. So I've got a few carving chisels here, and I'll just go through a little bit about the carving chisels before we have our comfort break. Important. If you get carbides and they come with these little caps, try and keep these little silicone caps because they really stop you from damaging your carbide. So I always put them back on. I lose them all the time, but I tend to just keep trying to buy them. So there we go. Okay, so what have we got to work with? We have got, that's 180. We've got standard chisels, so these are gougers. They are straight gougers because the sides are completely straight and they don't have any kind of bend in them. So it's just a standard straight gouge. All the gougers that you use with carving tools, they all have a numerical system on there. So if I show you, those are, so is that on screen? Yes, those are your straight gougers. And you can see that there's various different angles with them, and the numerical stamp that's often on the metal is a universal numbering system, and that means that it directly relates to that curvature of the chisel. It's called the sweep of the chisel. So I have one here that I tried to get a photograph of. You can see the closest one where it says on the sort of ash handle. That one's got a number stamped onto the metal. They all do, but the picture you can't really quite see them. So I am using a number 5 chisel. It's about, let me measure how wide it is. This was one of my most used chisels. This is 20 mil wide, so 3/4 of an inch wide. And it's a number 5, so it's a fairly deep curve. It's got a decent curve to it. And actually, when we start using this, I will be using this upside down. So if we get a shot on the tip of this tool, you'll be able to see that the very, very top of it is very highly polished. Let me try and get it to an angle. There we go. The actual shank of the tool further down is not. So you can see there's a sort of a colour difference between the top and the rest. So they're polished internally as well as externally. That is the back. Then you can see the polished bevel on there. And that means that you can literally turn them upside down and you can use the curvature to your advantage. So we are not making a negative curve with these, we are making positive curves. We're making all those segments around our pumpkin. So turning it upside down makes perfect sense. So that one will be used later on. We're actually going to be starting out with one of these. This is a fluter. Fluters are U-shaped, so if you look at the tips of all those gouges there, it is still a gouge. It still costs us a gouge, but we call them fluters, and they are U-shaped. Is the channel. So you get a couple of cuts in one. You can turn it on its side and get a very flat cut, or you can get a deep cut by going straight down at the bottom. So that's going to be what we mark everything out with, is that fluter. I am going to get a pair of pliers so I can keep checking. The other thing we're going to use are fishtails, and again, I'm going to be using those upside down. So fishtail gouges have a flared out end to them. You can see there how it sort of flares out to the top. And some of those in that picture, there's various different graduations of how much they flare out. Different companies make them in different ways. This one is a number 3, so it's quite a flat, straight across. We only really ever use that in lettering for wood carving. And a number 2 then is slight curve, number 3 a little bit more, and so on and so on. The more the numbers increase, the more the curvature increases. So we'll probably be using this guy as well. And then we will possibly have to use something like this. These are called veiners. Oops, sorry, I left that on there. So these are veiners, and these ones are tiny, tiny little gouges. If they're even smaller than that, they're called picks. So for literally for picking bits of wood out. But that one is a gouge, and it's just very, very, very small. They're called veiners because traditionally they were used a lot for cutting veins of leaves. So that is a little bit about those. So those are what we're going to be using, and then I have the little micromotor here. I won't bring the actual micromotor over, but I've got a few different shapes of cutters and a couple of different options. So we've got, it's gone out of my head. Are they cut saws? Yes, they are. So we've got a couple of ball cutters. One of them is the green one, which is very, very aggressive.
Emma, they look like saber-tooth.
Saber-tooth, that's it. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, these are saber-tooth, and I have got some cut saw ones. The cut saw ones are gold and silver, aren't they? So I've got various different shapes, and I'm going to go through which ones work and which ones work. This one is brand new, so this one is a saber-tooth, and this one's one of their whisper burrs. So it's got very, very sort of small teeth, so it doesn't leave quite as much damage, because the problem that you've got with lime is it will damage very easily. You'll see, and I've got a couple of pieces of wood that I'm just going to go through with the cutter to show you how they actually cut. The cut saw ones, these are the cut saws. They are again different types of burrs. You've got silver one, which is slightly more aggressive, and the gold one, which is a little bit less aggressive. They're okay. They are all right. They all have their pros and their cons, so we will go through those when we get to that stage.
Emma, how deep are you going on the carving?
Not particularly deep, Miss. So I just wanted to have a look then, because it was efficient, was that 6mm cutter, at the wall thickness I had left. Really, you don't want the segments to be too rounded. You don't want them kind of really all the way around, because they are very shallow. If you look at a pumpkin, some of them it's almost non-existent, but we're used to seeing something there. So I do like to show something. So I'm probably only going in the deepest point. I don't really want to be going on this size more than about 1/8 of an inch from the outside. So just bringing it in. So the top of the segments are quite flat, but I don't like them completely flat. I like the whole thing to flow. So it really does depend on what you want, really. I've got a little one to show you here, which was made by a friend of mine. It's very dusty. So Lindsay made this, and she made it for me, and it's, as I say, it's been sat in the workshop for about 2 or 3 years, I think, since she gave me it. And she coloured this with my chameleon powders. And what I like about it is she actually did a little witch's hat instead of like making it look natural, which I thought was pretty cool, actually. And then she cut a hole in the base. So the underneath of this, she's put a hole there so you can actually turn it on and off, and she glued the little light in there. I think the batteries had it. Oh, there's just a tiny, tiny flicker of light going on in there. It needs some new batteries, but you can also get to the battery case. So she just hot melt glued that in. I don't use those particular fake candles. I prefer a slightly different type, to be honest. And those you've got to open it up and take them out. They're the screw fit ones, so you've got to screw them down for them to light up, and you unscrew them slightly to turn them on again. But I mean, that's what she did. This is what Lindsay made instead. So she didn't do a great deal of hollowing. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job of hollowing. She left it pretty much as round as it was, and she just put a channel in for the segments, and it looks absolutely fine, to be fair. It's not like it doesn't detract from it whatsoever. It's a really cute little pumpkin box with nowhere near as much work. It just really does. It just depends on what you're after and how much work you want to put into it, because what we're going to do now, it is faffy. It takes time. I can't deny that. Right, I am just looking at the tools that I have here, and because this is the standard size of fluter which I normally use for this, but actually because I don't want to go too thin, I might drop it down and I might just grab the slightly smaller version. So this is exactly the same tool, it's just about half the width across. So that was the one that I was going to use. And this is now the one I'm swapping to, just because it's going to do a shallower channel. So I'm going to start making a cut. It doesn't particularly matter where. I've got a bit of damage on this edge, so we might as well get rid of that. So we might as well turn that into a channel for the box. So I'm actually going to bring the tool rest up so that I can use my hand on the tool rest. So it still is supporting the cut, but it's not supporting the tool. So you hold these, they're all two-handed chisels, you hold them exactly the same as you would a bowl gouge or a spindle gouge, or very similar, not an underhand hold, but an overhand hold. So you have one hand on the shank of the chisel, and the other hand is doing the steering. The one on the shank is kind of guiding it in a way. And then, yeah, well, it's easier to show you. So we're going to start at this point here, and we're going to go onto the main body, and then we're going to go down the base section. Okay, the worst little bit is this bit here. It's the join between the lid and the base. And actually, I really want to be working as I would turn it. If you imagine this to be a massive bead, you'd start at the high point and you'd go to the left-hand side towards the headstock to roll it this to the left and the opposite way for the right. And you need to do that because it will start to tear out. The lid section, we might have to hold that in a carving jig in order to get that bit done. But what I tend to do is go around and do all these sections at once, and I don't tend to measure them. You could use your indexing system. I'd hoped that wasn't going to happen. You can use your indexing system to get them a little bit more even if you want to, but because we're going for a pumpkin, I don't aim for them to be even because pumpkins aren't. So I just kind of guess. Just try not to pop that lid off really again. The other great thing if you don't go even all the way around is that locating the lid when they're slightly off is a lot easier. So much easier. Okay, so because that is popping off, I could actually bring the tailstock up with something like a Jacob's chuck just to hold that into place so that it doesn't pop off all the time. And I think I will do that actually while we do the main body of work, because it's going to really irritate me is that when it's just jumping off all the time. I don't want to put a centre on it really, because it's going to damage that little spigot that we made. So the thing with carving, one of the hardest things to figure out is how to hold things. It is difficult. Right, there we go. And it is one of those things that you've got to figure out. That's why we've got all sorts of things like carving jigs to try and make life a bit simpler, and so on. But for this first bit, there's no better way than carving it whilst it's actually sat in the jaws in front of you, because you're stood upright and it's facing you, and that is the perfect orientation to be working from. So I don't want to go too far around the edges because that will actually cause me to start leaning. So the top section you do have to do separately. This is why this is a little bit of a fiddly option. So these channels are just marking things out to begin with. I'll probably just go to there for now, just so that you're getting the idea, and then we'll come back and we'll start to round it off. So now this is the time that I will get the gouges, the straight gouges, so that we can start to kind of round things off. So I'm going to hold it upside down. I think this one might be slightly too big, so I might go with the number 3 fishtail. And again, we've got to start from that widest point and bring ourselves down. And what I'm trying to do is I'm kind of scoring with that point of the chisel. It's called the ear of the chisel. So you can kind of see the score mark there. And then we're going to come to the other side and we're going to meet it. Now that scoring, don't get too obsessed over it, because you will go deeper and deeper and deeper trying to get that right. And that's when you'll carve a hole in the side of your box. So we're just going on there. Now I'm able to carve right and left-handed. I can't turn right and left-handed, or I struggle with it enormously. But carving isn't too much of a problem, it is fortunate for me that I can do that. If you can't, it's a little bit more awkward, and you might have to carve this in 2 separate stages. But that is if you're hand carving it. If you're using cutters, it's not so much of a problem. If you're using a burr in a micromotor, or you're using a Dremel or something like that, then there's no real problem. But carving chisels, it is directional. It is very directional, because it's all grain based, so you've got to get it right. And what this is doing is it's giving me quite a nice tool finish, which is what I actually used on the smaller one that I showed you earlier. So that was left completely tool finished, and it almost gives it sort of a hammered effect in a way. And this is, it really is a case of you can take this as far as you want to go. So we're getting a nice shape on there and blending out any kind of shoulders, and then I'll bring that round. We'll move on to this one. So I concentrate on the segment part, sorry, the negative part of the segment first. Can't really call it a cove, it's not a cove, but the separator between the two. I concentrate on the area, the lowest point first, and then kind of work back out from it, because that gives you your visual reference, really, to get that rounded off. You can take your line from there. I'm having a bit of a problem with the headstock in the way because it is quite a small piece. So actually it would be better if I could cut this in the carving jig. The downside is the lid's going to keep popping off. And I do like to carve them together so that you get a perfect, or as close to a perfect join as you can possibly get. Yeah, let's get in there. So I'll do another one or so. Just so that you can get the idea. And then what we'll do with this one is we'll turn our little stem and we'll leave this one as a natural one. The reason I'm going to do it that way is I can move on to one of the bigger ones to do all the other sort of fiddly bits and pieces and to play with the micromotor. Who asked a question? Mez is right. Most of my carving chisels are either the older Henry Taylors or they're from File, which is a Swiss brand of carving tool. The actual carver that I have, I don't have a powered carver as such. I have a micromotor and burrs, and it does actually have a foot pedal. I don't use the foot pedal because I don't particularly do enough work to warrant it, really. But I'll show you in a second. I don't know what the equivalent one is. I know that do you guys have Fordhams over in the US? I know that that's quite a common brand, but I haven't got a Fordham. I don't really do enough of the piercing and powered carving and stuff to need one. So this little micromotor is more than I need. I do have a Dremel as well, but I find that it's alright, it's the Dremel, but I prefer this little micromotor. Right, so let's just take that channel out. So if it's a little bit messy, if you're struggling to get that to match up, don't just do it with the ears of the chisel, because you're going to keep going under each layer. You're just going to kind of step it down, and that's when you cut through the side. You can actually use the blade. So we're just going to go in with the whole of the cutting edge, and we're kind of going to do a little bit of a V cut in there. So we're cutting in from one side, turning the chisel over and cutting in from the other side, and that has just cleaned that area up. What you might need to do in this instance is use a flatter chisel, just so that it's a little bit more even than going in with than a curved one, because that is making a little bit of a mess still. Oh, there we go. But yeah, that's ideally what you want to be doing. If you're struggling to get those those ears to meet that in that channel there, which I am a bit. It's also the wood. It's just fibrous is lime, so that's quite a normal thing. So I will swap over onto one of these other guys, because this I actually want to do a decent job of. I'm kind of saving all the projects that I've done for the various demos so far. So I want to finish that properly, and if I turn this round and turn the base off, I won't be able to finish the carving particularly easily. So we're going to take this out of the jaws. We're coming on quite nicely there. And then I'm going to move on to one of the pieces I prepared earlier. So that is where we're at so far. Oh, that's not too bad a shape, actually. What I do need to do, though, is I need to come a bit flatter here. So I need to cut under a little bit quicker. I'm quite happy that it's that shape. I just felt that the other textured one, which is what I'm mimicking, I just feel like it's a bit more of an apple. It's not bad, but yeah, it's okay. But I think that's a bit better a shape. It doesn't matter. To be fair, it don't matter. Pumpkins are pumpkins. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. It's just like eggs. We've got this idyllic view of an egg, and it's not necessarily the correct view. That is square. Let's put it in the chuck. And then I don't have to change chucks. So I'm just going to crush that into the jaws and bring the tailstock up to do the majority of the turning, and then take that away. Just need to wind the quill out a little bit just so that I can fit the tool rest in. There we go. That is a really good question. Who's just asked that? Is that Nadia? Sycamore or maple, they are very good. You could use walnut. Walnut's not too terrible to carve. Trying to think of other things. Because you've got quite extensive carving, if you're carving it by hand, that's what makes it difficult with the wood choice. So yeah, maple, sycamore, this is the lime or basswood, and walnut. Those would probably be my first choices. I definitely would not go anywhere near beech. Beech is very hard, oak is very hard. Ash can be either very hard or it can be soft. It's a bit of a funny one, is ash. So those are all good timbers to use. You could use something like yew, but that will be quite tough to carve. Those are definitely the easiest ones for carving, really. Yeah, tulip's not bad, but that can be quite fibrous as well, Mez. It can be a bit... the grain can run if you're not careful, like it can with lime, but either of those would be absolutely fine. But yeah, tulip's a good shout, actually. So I'm just going to round this off. We're not going to need a great deal of this at all. Once this is rounded off, I'll probably get the tailstock out of the way. If I just cut that to a slight dovetail, it doesn't actually have to be completely circular. We should be alright, and then I'll turn it round. I'll still have the tailstock up initially, but we've got a few points of contact there, if the jaws will close enough. That's the real question. Oh yeah, we're good. That's proper. So I'll bring that up to knock those corners off, then we'll get it out of the way. So I'm just using a 1/4" ball gouge for this actually, just because it's so small it doesn't really warrant getting a spindle gouge on it, spindle roughing gouge on it. So now we will move the tailstock back because it's going to get in the way pretty much immediately. So while we've got plenty of wood in place, a lot of strength, now we can start to cut the underneath. So this is the bit that's going to sit up against our little box. So we also need a little 4mm hole. And I've tried being the operative word, to make that flat. I've actually gone slightly up again towards that little peg, but that's not going to be a problem. Width wise, I do want this to be quite wide so that I've got plenty of room to carve it, but I'm actually just need to go in slightly and make this slightly slightly concave, and then drill our 4mm hole. So I'm going to use a little hand drill for this. It's called a pin vise. You want the speed nice and low, just a standard drilling speed, so about 600 RPM. Thought I'd piloted that enough, but I haven't. So you do need to pilot if you're going to use one of these. So I'm going to use a straight edge parting tool, just the corner, just to start it off. I thought I'd done enough with the ball gouge, but I hadn't. And that'll just stop it wandering around all over the place. There we go. So now we can make sure that this will butt up to our lid, and it does. That's fine. Okay, so now I can start to shape this. So I'm going to shape the bottom of this, so I want that nice and wide, but that's probably a bit too wide. And we're just going to go for just a cove. So it's really not that exciting, to be honest. I'm going to keep that quite square. So this is a perfect example of where turning right-handed would be a real bonus. Kind of possibly over-exaggerating that cove a little bit actually. Let's hold that up and see what this is looking like. It's not bad, it's a bit big. Take it down a bit more, but we're getting there. So this area is a little bit too wide actually. Let's see if that's any better. Still a bit on the big side. Now we don't want to go too delicate with it, because then you've got the same old problem that if you're texturing it, you can take away too much material and then it becomes not very usable. So let's see if that looks any better. I think the problem is here. I think I haven't got enough of a curve going on just at the back of that. It's not bad. That's better. And as I've said already, don't get too worked up on the surface finish of this. It's not going to be sanded because the whole thing will be turned. That's better. That fits nice. So, sorry, carved. So now we can move on and we can just do a little bit of carving on this. I'll leave the respirator on because we will do a little bit more. Are we doing it? Yeah, we'll finish some more turning on this. We're going to have we'll have a play with the different burrs. Have a play with it on this guy for doing some of the carving. And then I'll go through, I've done one eye and half a mouth, and I'll go through the other side if you're doing a face and some of the things that you've got to be aware of if you're doing the face. So all this texture is done with a fluter. I'm just going to cut into these areas here and just sort of push them off with the grain really, because I want a few of the area to just chip away. Again, so it looks a little bit more natural. And then you're going from the outside edge now. I'm using, so you're carving the same as you would turn. So you're going from the high spots down to the low spots. I'm kind of holding it like a pencil, which is absolutely fine, as long as you are anchored somewhere. So what I tend to do is I use my little finger, my ring finger, to kind of anchor my hand as I'm cutting in this manner. And I'm just trying to go from the high point down to the low points. And what you'll get is down at the bottom, you can't come back up, so you have to just come back and try and meet it at the other side. You will get tear out in the bottom, but to be honest, you're making something that's mimicking something natural, and it really isn't that neat and tidy in nature. So don't panic too much about it. You just kind of levering the tool down just to make it look like it's got ridges and veins, and then coming back down the other side just to meet that and pop that away. When it's got a finish on it, it looks really great. And the walnut will look good because it'll just darken it all. It'll look really good. So I think that this might have been quite a cool little experiment actually. Okay. Now this I can probably finish at a later stage, either that or I'll just turn another one, so I don't really mind parting this off. The only thing that you've got left to do is a little bit on the top, but you can do that once it's all glued together, and you just sort of put in a couple of grooves across the top of the piece. And if you wanted to vary these lines at all, vary the tool, so get something like a larger fluter to make wider lines. So I think actually I'll part that off just because I want to move on a little bit more so that we can get this somewhat finished, or we can move on to the texture, etc. So just going to go in with the spindle gouge just to sort of round that off a little bit. To be fair, it really doesn't matter. So that is our stem. I really like that. I love those contrasting woods. That is going to look really good when it's properly finished. So that was definitely a good move. Happy with that. Yeah, that's it. So mine is made by Wood Art Products, which is a UK-based company. As I say, you can have an extension. I'll just put that to one side so that Roy can get it in the camera. It does have a foot pedal, but I never use it. It's just got a start and stop. That is your speed, forward and reverse, and that's whether or not you're using it, turning it on and off by hand or by the foot pedal. So really you do need some dust extraction and a mask, and definitely some eye protection with these, because they can be quite aggressive. So we've got a few little cutters in here. I'm just going to show you the various different finishes that you can get in the different shapes. The problem that we've got is that we're wanting to come down to quite a sharp bit in the middle. That's what I prefer. Everybody's different, but I like it to come down to quite a sharp not a ridge, the opposite of a ridge in the middle. Pardon? Furrow. Groove, yeah, groove. And none of the cutters that I've used so far can achieve that. So this one is possibly the least aggressive of all of them. This is the Sabertooth Whisper. You can get them in so many different shapes and sizes. And this is, I've actually just got a little piece of beech here. So I can show you, because this will hold the texture a bit better than the lime will. So we'll just start the cut. And you can draw this one towards you, and you can make that texture very similar to the hammered texture that I use with carving tools. And because of it being this kind of whisper burr, trying to turn lathe off, it doesn't leave too many grooves. There are some, there are some grooves in there, but it's not terrible at all. So that's if you want some kind of tool texture, which you can use on the outside of your piece. Now I thought, because it's quite a slim cutter, it might be quite good for doing the middle bit. And if I'm going to have to keep stopping it and showing you, because the light's not great and you need to be able to see the shadow. So that's not a bad channel. That's about the same thickness as the fluter. So for doing the initial working out stage, that is a really good cutter for it. You've got these guys, so you've got various little kind of teardrop shapes. I don't actually like these very much. They really leave, and they really kind of tear up the wood of the cut saws. So I'm just doing this in a few different angles, and I find them very difficult to actually control. They kind of... Let me get that to a better angle for Roy. So they do burn, because they're fine but aggressive, and they often just get into their own sort of track and pull themselves off to an angle. So I was actually trying to go in a straight line there, and it just pulled it off. And it wasn't because it followed the grain. They just seem to have that nature about them. So those are the only two cut saws that I have. I don't have any others. I much prefer the Sabertooths. I do have some Sabertooth the same shape. So I'll just get the yellow one out, because that's less aggressive than the green. But for me, these are, the yellow and the green are very, very aggressive. So these ones are a little bit easier to control, but you do get heavy grooves in them. Oh, you can. Sorry, I've been moving it all this time, and you could see it where it was. So I am not a huge fan of that, because for me, if you're putting texture onto something like that, it's the overall texture that you're trying to achieve that's that should be the focus, as opposed to all the little lines it's caused. So that's why I love the carving chisels, because there's nothing like that. It's almost a mirror finish on the wood, that you don't have to sand it. You can sand it, but you don't have to sand it. I do like the little white cutter, the little Whisper, and that was the only one I could get at the time. I need to get a few more of these, because they are much, much better than the Whisper burrs. So I'm going to cut a couple of grooves on here, but no matter what shape you have, what I'm trying to show you on that piece of wood, no matter what shape you have, you can't get that crisp middle point. So this has been done here with the carving tool, so I'm just going to go next to it. And hopefully you can see that is extremely similar. So for actually cutting this to begin with, for working it out, you could just fire over it with one of those. But they do eat through wood. You have got to be careful that you don't go too deep with them. The thing with your hand carving tools is they won't go that deep. You've got to really push them. But I do quite like that particular shape. I think that it's a decent one, and it's got quite a lot of different uses. But once you've done that, yes, you could potentially then start to use it and sort of feather out to the side a little bit. Or you could jump onto a slightly different shape, and that's doing a good job. It's doing okay. But once you have done all that texture, even with the Whisper burrs, you will probably have to sand this by hand. So normally, if you're sanding something that you've hand carved, just to clean up, if you wanted to smooth out all the lines that you've, smooth out any texture from the carving tool, then you just start with 240 grit. That you might have to start with some 180 just to get rid of those grooves initially. And you'd be able to sand it, no problem. I've got a couple of pieces here. So you can just fold. Yeah, you definitely need 180 grit. And then you just got to work your way up your grits. I mean, that's probably going to take quite a bit to bring it back down to what you want it to be. And you've got various sanding attachments that you could use, from a Dremel, for example. There's all sorts of things that you can get, so that would speed up the sanding process. But you've just got to be careful with anything like that you don't start putting negative sort of hollows from whatever you use sanding, if you're using a mechanical sander as opposed to just using it by hand. So that is just a little bit about these. I know that I haven't gone over them sort of in massive detail, but for this particular project, there's not a great deal of choice that you've got. What's Stephen just put? You've just put an Axminster Flexi shaft grinder, was £100 off, and a hand chisel set for it, which changes from rotary motion to reciprocal. Yes, they are quite good. Was it an Axminster one that I used? Some of the reciprocal carvers, those are pretty decent. I will be dead straight. I don't have one. I don't have any reciprocal carvers because I prefer to hand carve by miles. So for me to get one of those, it's a bit of a waste of money. But I have used one, and it does take the stress out of the carving. It takes a lot of the effort out of it, because that is doing the work. And you can get all sorts of different shapes and sizes of chisels for your reciprocal carvers. A lot of them will probably sell the sets with V-tools. They can be a little bit of a pain to sharpen correctly. They're fine when you first get them, but then sharpening them is hard work. Would I use a V-tool for something like this? Probably not for doing any of the roughing out. I would use a rounded carver to do the roughing out of these initial channels, and then I might go over it right at the end with a V-tool just to get a sharper bottom to these coves. Would I do that? Yeah, I think that's possibly the only way you could do it with a reciprocal carver is to use the V-tools, actually. So this one, I'm just holding this on expansion to finish off the base. So the first thing that you want to be doing is make sure that you know what depth that you've got, how deep you've gone inside. So this is the important part, that you know how far you've gone into your piece of work, because when you turn it round and you start to undercut the underneath, that's when it all goes to pot. So I've got plenty of room at the bottom of this. It's quite chunky in the underneath, so there's no problems there. So check your depth of your piece. And this, I'm going to lose all this chunk. So all this is going to go. That shoulder needs to go. So we just kind of blend in the shape in a little bit. And then I just like to, from this widest point here, start to just undercut. You don't want to go mad. You don't want to undercut it loads. But already we've lost quite a lot of thickness to this base. So because I've taken a lot out, I just want to check if you cannot do this bit in the middle. So that's like just the underneath. Oh, there's plenty. That if you're running out of space, if you're running out of thickness, sorry, in your base section, don't panic too much. You don't have to put this on here. You can just undercut it slightly, or even finish it off at flat. In fact, this guy, which was one of the first ones I did, I never even thought about doing it. So I didn't even bring the carved area right to the bottom. So I didn't bring it all the way in. And there's no decoration on the underneath. That didn't come until later, and I actually thought, no, let's make this whole thing a proper sort of pumpkin replica almost. So we need this area here to be the most prominent area, so that's the bit it needs to sit on, not the middle. So at the moment the middle is proud, so we need to get that taken down in height a little bit. So make sure that that is the first thing you establish, and if you need to just double check it, get yourself a straight edge and just make sure that it is sitting on those edges, which it is. That's fine, happy with that. Now we can think about creating that little bump in the middle if you want to do it. So all you're doing is just going a little bit further into the middle. So this is why you need to make absolutely positive that you have the thickness available to do it, just to make that little button. So I'm happy that's all rounded off. So we can start then to complete our carving process. So I'm happy to finish this area off here. Where's my fluter? So these areas, we can continue to bring those down and underneath. And if you want to go all the way underneath, I would take it to here, and then really it needs to come off and go into a carving jig. So I will show you that just to finish off. So I'll just take a couple of these down towards the base section. That's the one that we were using the whisper burr with. And then the last little thing to show you with the carving side before we put it onto the carving jig is the face. I'm just putting those in so that that makes sense when we go around the corner. So, eyes and mouth, they are a little bit of a faff. I actually start out with a drill. So I'm just going to have to do this facing towards me a little bit because I can't quite see if it's on the top. So 4mm drill bit that we used earlier, I'm just going to go in there and drill a hole initially. The reason I'm doing this is because it's a lot quicker to use a drill bit than it is to try and cut in there with a carving chisel. Now this is quite thick because I didn't do a huge job of hollowing it. I didn't linger on that very much. And what we've got here is we have a round hole. What we need to try and get to is a triangular hole. Now, if you've gone extremely thick with your wall thicknesses, you're going to have a little bit of an issue. You're not going to particularly be able to get a chisel all the way through to make it completely triangular, but you can create the illusion of it. So we're just going to use our number 3 fishtail, and we're just going to go to the flat point, the bottom point of the triangle, the bottom flat, should I say, of the triangle. We're going to push into our point, and we're going to do the same up here. And that kind of, we can flick that out, and that gives us a really sharp edge, if I rotate that a little bit more. So that gives us the point of the triangle. I'm going to do that again at the other side. And then there as well. And then you can, once you've got a bit of room, you can get the chisel in a little bit deeper and you can make that triangle go in a bit deeper. What I actually could do with is a slightly narrower gouge, but that does give the illusion of a triangle. So you've got those sort of sharp corners, so you can see that it is a triangle. I would rather go in there now with a thinner chisel, a narrower chisel, and get right in and go all the way through, but that can take a little bit of time. If you're not too bothered about it, it doesn't really matter, but if you are putting a light in there, you will see that it's a circle in the middle as opposed to it being a triangular shape. So that's why I would go in just with a slightly narrower chisel just to sort that out. The mouth I've already started, so I drilled a hole in the middle and I've done one side of it. And basically it's very similar. You're just working your way down. And you just keep cutting in and cutting in all the way through. You do have to be careful, even with carving chisels, at breakout on the other side, because you will still get that. And it is an unfortunate side of things. You can go in with some abrasives, or you can go in there with a chisel and back it off slightly if you want to. But that is the way that we do, or that I would do the mouth. If you want to put a tooth in it, that's a nightmare. So I've left this area so I can put a little tooth in it. Now I need to use that tiny little gouge that I showed you right at the start, because we've got to actually go round where the tooth is going to be and create our outline of our little tooth. Oops, let's just remove that bit of grain. So because we've got much smaller space, I do need to work with this little gouge now. There we go. Just trying to work that down as far as possible. and I actually don't know mechanically what you would use for this. And if anybody's got any suggestions or any ideas, then please feel free to chip in or pop it in the chat. Because you've got such a small space to maneuver. Now you could use something like these little cutters. So these little cutters you can do piercing with. So they cut on the sides as well as the tip, but they are way too thin to get through that amount of wood. They'll just break, and you won't really make any headway with them. So yeah, I'm not really sure. You might be able to just drill a series of holes out and then go in with some kind of chisel or other. But it really does add a lot of work on if you go in and do teeth. It looks a heck of a lot better. I'll be dead honest, I love the look of them with the little teeth in there. But yeah.
Emma,
Yeah.
I've got a set of like miniature saws that are used for cutting fret slots in the nut of a guitar.
Course, yeah, something. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, fret saws. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cracking idea, actually.
I didn't actually mean fret saws, as in a fret saw in a frame. They're actually miniature blades that are used for cutting.
Okay.
You know, on the end of a guitar neck, where the strings pass over, the strings pass through a slot, and these they call them files, but they're actually little saw blades.
Yeah, that would be
for cutting the slots. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be able to get something like that in there.
A fret saw blade would work.
Sorry, I misheard you initially then. I'm just going to drop that tooth down.
2 ideas for the price of one.
2 ideas for the price of one, absolutely.
Well, a lot of people would have a fret saw, but not many would have guitar making tools.
But yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I'd not thought about something like that. So,
in fact, you could probably cut out the whole mouth shape with the eyes.
I think you could. Yeah, I think you could. Saw. Probably a lot easier than the chisels because this is faffy, as you can see.
Yeah.
That's why I did half of it beforehand, because it's just to save that little bit of time. But we're kind of almost there. We need a slightly narrower tool, really, just to finish off that side of the mouth. The top side as I'm working away from is nice and easy, but that I just can't quite get the angle that I need because the tooth is in the way. Right. Flip those bits out. So we've got a little face in there, and we've got a tooth. If you have drawn on there with pencil, which I have, I always mark them out with pencil. If you're using carving tools, you can just scrape away that pencil. It's very difficult to get pencil marks off things without making the whole thing look really grubby. So I just tend to use this and scrape them away. If you don't need that to begin with, then that's great. Less cleanup. But we're starting to look about right. But I do want to show you the damage that will probably have caused on the inside. So if we can get that on Roy's camera, can you see all the breakout in there? So that is a problem. What I tend to do is I will go in there just with the carving tool, and I'll just try and just kind of knock off those little bits as best I can. It's not the neatest way of doing it, but it's neater than leaving them. And unless you're sort of really kind of going to be putting your hand in there and feeling what the inside's like, it doesn't matter too much. But that's all I tend to do, is just go in and back that off. And you could go in and just give it a sand as well, just to finish that. But yeah, so backing that off just neatens that up a tiny little bit. So that neatens up our little face. And the last thing I will show you is just the carving jig, just to finish off the underneath of this. This is yet another Hope wood turning accessory. A fantastic advertisement for Simon, because I use everything that he makes. It doesn't mean that there aren't alternatives available though. So your carving jig just slots into your tool post on your banjo, and then you have the corresponding thread to your lathe for your chucks, and then we can hold this on here. So all we're going to do is finish this off. The reason it's in the carving jig is just for ease of access. If you don't have anything to hold it, then this, I nearly forgot to show you my vise. I got this from Axminster in the UK a while ago, years ago. It was about 35-45 quid, and it is a little bench vise with a clamp on it, so it's movable. You can put it on any sort of bench, and it's brilliant. And sometimes, well, before I had a carving jig, I used to just take the chuck off, hold in the piece, and clamp the whole chuck into this clamp, this vise. And it's you sat at a bench, so you can sit there and you can work on it, and it's facing up. The important thing is you want it facing you, whatever you're working on for carving, because you can really hurt yourself if you are trying to carve and you are leaning at an angle or sat awkwardly. It's really, really bad for you, and it does hurt. So the carving jigs are brilliant, but if you haven't got one, that is a pretty decent alternative. I don't know if they still sell them, but it's just a little clamp bench vise. So useful bit of kit. So the last little bit that we need to do with this is, for me, I like to just bring this round. So actually in this instance it probably would be easier to be sat with the micromotor and the whisper burrs. This tool's actually lost its edge because I hit a bit of metal with it, and we can bring that down. The whisper burrs will also do a lot of the texturing that I tend to do on the bottom and the stalk, the stem. So all I do for this is just come from the outside edge and just texture it, just some little grooves going in there, going over each other to make it look as natural as we can. All the way around. And then, of course, to finish off, I do go around. So this is where, if you've gone a bit thin in the base, and believe me, I have done this more than once, I have to admit, and you're going down and you're cutting this last little bit right up to there, and you see it go through, you just see that corner and you hear it sort of just pop through there. Yeah, I've done it so that it's literally held on by just a few tiny little bits. So there you go, guys. So that is pretty much the carving done. Like I've already said, I'm not going to spend ages and ages repeating and repeating, because it is exactly the same and just going all the way around. So that is all the different bits and pieces. Finishing wise, I always finish these with lime. I always finish these with an oil. Whether it's lime, sycamore or anything, I always put an oil on. The traditional carving finish is Danish oil, but to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the smell of Danish oil. But you can use a mineral oil, and if you think that it's going to end up in the hands of kids and putting sweets or candies in them, it might be an idea to finish it with a food grade mineral oil, so that there's nothing that's going to be in contact with any foodstuffs that are in there. If you sell them and you put candies in or sweets in with them, I would encourage people to have pre-wrapped sweets, so that it's not going to spoil the wood, because if it's not wrapped, it's potentially going to leach out the colourings and stuff into the wood, which isn't great. If you are using little LED lights, then there's loads of different ones you can get. You can get the ones that Lindsay used in her little pumpkin box here. So they're kind of flickering tea lights. Very, very simple, very inexpensive, and you just switch them on and off by a switch underneath. Like I say, the battery's pretty much gone in this, which might be a problem because I think part of the glue covers that. So these are the ones that I actually prefer, and they're supposedly waterproof for these, or at least water resistant. So you just twist those, but they don't flicker. That is the downside of them. So you can get them solid colours, or you can get them one that colour changes. I am getting some really cool ones that I've had on order for ages, but I haven't got any to show you because I'm waiting for them to come. Do I have a sample? I don't even think I have a sample of them. But they have a little remote control, so you can change the colour of them and the speed that they change colour and all sorts of things. I still don't think that they flicker. Or you can just go with some standard fairy lights. The tea lights are great, but they don't put out a massive amount of light. So if you're wanting something particularly bright, where's our little finished one? So particularly bright, I would go with just some standard little lights, and if you unravel them, those are going to give you the best amount of light coming through that face by a long shot. The tea lights are okay, but they're just these will definitely give you the most light output. Right then, guys, so thank you very much. Let me just take this off. Let's actually show you what we've sort of finished. I know that we had a couple of here's one I made earlier moments. I will get the other one finished that we were making here. I'm going to leave this one as a natural one. Oh no, without a smiley face on, and leave it as tool finish. But I really love that contrasting top. I'm definitely going to do that again, and I will probably do the same underneath and just put a little disc at the bottom of the corresponding wood on there. That might be a bit too far, but we'll see. I'll see how I feel about it. But that was relatively simple to do, and it does mean that you can utilise a smaller blank, which if you are using basswood or lime, it's expensive. So the smaller the piece, the better. But yeah, I am looking forward to getting that finished. Those are our two little guys that we've done tonight. Okie dokie then, guys. Well, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will get these finished. I've just thrown the cap away. Oops. I'll get these finished, get everything sorted, and hopefully see you again at an IRD very soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening, guys, and take care. And yes, I will see you in a fortnight.
Yeah,
bye, guys.